Let me tell you something about powerful men. They spend their whole lives making sure no one sees them weak. No one sees them tired. No one sees them human. They build walls so high and so thick that eventually even they forget there's a person living inside all that stone. Park Shi-joon built his walls at 19 years old and had not let a single person pass them since. Until a hospital room. Until a woman who talked to herself. Until 22 days that changed everything he thought he knew about what it meant to be seen. Stay with me. Watch until the very end. And if this one gets into your chest the way I think it will, like this video, subscribe to this channel, and tell me in the comments at exactly what moment you knew these two were done for. Let's go. Park Shi-joon was 34 years old and had been running the Obsidian Syndicate for exactly 15 years, 3 months, and 11 days. He knew the number because he kept track of it, the way other men kept track of anniversaries. It was the most important relationship of his life, which, if you asked anyone who knew him personally, was both completely believable and deeply sad. The Obsidian Syndicate was not the largest criminal organization in South Korea. It was the most precise. Shi-joon had built it on the philosophy that chaos was for people who had not thought things through carefully enough, and he had thought everything through carefully enough. He did not move without information. He did not speak without purpose. He did not trust without evidence, which meant, practically speaking, that he trusted almost no one, which he had decided years ago was not a personal failure, but a professional necessity. He had 2 people who came close to the inner circle. Oh Dae-sung, his second in command, who had been with him since the beginning, who was charming and sharp, and who wore Italian cologne the way other men wore armor. And Shin Woo-jin, head of operations, who was the most precise thinker Shi-joon had ever encountered, a man who processed information the way computers processed data, efficiently and without sentiment. He trusted them both within specific parameters. He had learned, over 15 years, that trust without parameters was just hope in a nice suit, and hope had never once kept him alive. What kept him alive was information, anticipation, the ability to read a room before anyone in it had decided what the room was going to be. Which is why, on the night of the shooting, the thing that bothered him most was not the pain. It was that he had not seen it coming. He had been leaving a meeting at a private location in Gangnam, the kind of meeting that did not appear on any schedule and that 3 people knew about, when 2 men he had never seen before stepped out of a car and made a very decisive attempt on his life. They were professionals. Not the best he had ever encountered, but competent. He was shot once in the left shoulder and once in the right side before his security closed the distance, and then the 2 men were no longer a concern. He remembered the ride to the hospital. He remembered his personal doctor's voice, controlled and careful, saying things like, "stable," and "no major vessels," and "we'll know more by morning." He remembered the ceiling of the operating room, very white, very bright. And then he remembered nothing until the recovery room, where the first thing he heard was Dae-sung on the phone in the corridor, speaking in a low voice about contingency timelines. Shi-joon lay in the recovery room and listened to the word contingency and thought about what it meant in the mouth of the man who was supposed to be his most trusted lieutenant. Contingency timelines. Not recovery plans, not support structures. Timelines. As in, how long do we have, and what do we do when it runs out? He closed his eyes and made a decision before he had fully regained feeling in his left hand. He would stay unconscious. As far as anyone outside this hospital room was concerned, Park Shi-joon was in a medically uncertain state, stable but unresponsive, and no one could predict when or whether he would wake. He would use that fiction the way he had used every other piece of information in his career, as leverage, as a lens, as a way of seeing exactly what was true when people thought no one was looking. It was a clean plan, a solid plan, the kind of plan that accounted for the obvious variables. He had not accounted for Zuri Mensah. She arrived on his second morning at 6:03. He knew it was 6:03 because there was a clock on the wall to his left that he could see through his barely open eyelashes if he angled his head very slightly, which he had spent considerable time on the first night figuring out how to do without appearing to move. She came in the way people come in when they are not performing their entrance for anyone. No hesitation, no extra care, no particular awareness of the weight of the room. Just a person arriving to do a job they knew well. He heard her set something down. He heard her pick up his chart. And then he heard her say to no one, or possibly to him, or possibly to the room in general, "Okay, 407, let's meet properly. My name is Zuri Mensah. I'm your day nurse." A pause. "You can't hear me, but my grandmother said you should always introduce yourself properly to people who are unconscious, because you never know what they're picking up. My grandmother was a very wise woman, and also a little bit extra, rest her soul. But in this case, I choose to believe she was onto something." Shi-jun lay completely still and thought, "What?" She continued doing her checks, and the commentary continued alongside it, unself-conscious and unhurried, like the audio track of a person whose internal monologue had never fully learned to stay internal. "Blood pressure is looking good, heart rate good. Whoever did your surgery did clean work, I'll give them that." She adjusted something near the IV. "Your hands are going to be dry by the end of the week if someone doesn't moisturize them. That's not in my job description, but it's going to bother me, so I'll probably just handle it. Don't read into that." He did not read into it. He noted it, filed it, and categorized it under unusual. She came back at noon. She came back at 4. Each time with the same unhurried energy, the same quiet commentary, the same complete absence of the particular tension that everyone else brought into his room. The doctors were careful. The other nurses were nervous in the specific way that people are nervous around someone powerful, even when that someone is unconscious. The security man stationed outside his door was tense in a way that Shi-jun could feel through the wall. Zuri walked in like she was entering a room where someone happened to be asleep, and her job was to make sure they slept well. On the third day, she brought the Bluetooth speaker. It was small, pale blue, and she set it on the windowsill without any announcement or explanation. She played a playlist that opened with an old Lauryn Hill song, and moved without apology into what Shi-jun identified as a shiny B-side from 2013, and then into something by a Nigerian artist he did not recognize, and then back to American R&B. And the whole sequence had an internal logic that he could not immediately decode, but that was somehow not chaotic. He was a man who controlled every element of his environment. He had opinions about the temperature of rooms and the arrangement of furniture and the specific frequency of interruptions he was willing to tolerate. He should have found the unsolicited playlist irritating. He did not find it irritating. This bothered him slightly. On day 4, the scheming began in earnest. Dae-sung and Woo-jin arrived together at 2 in the afternoon. This was notable because they had not, to Shi-jun's knowledge, voluntarily spent time in each other's company since a disagreement 18 months ago over resource allocation in the northern operation. The fact that they were arriving together now, standing together at the foot of his bed, told him that his current state had provided them with a common cause that 18 months of professional friction had not. Dae-sung said, "The Singapore partners have sent 3 messages. The board is asking for a statement." Woo-jin said, "I've been managing the communications. We have a window of approximately 2 weeks before the external uncertainty becomes destabilizing." 2 weeks. Dae-sung looked at Shi-jun's face. And if he's not responsive by then? Shi-jun had always appreciated Woo-jin's precision. He appreciated it now in a way that had nothing to do with affection. Woo-jin said, Then we establish an interim structure. We've discussed the framework. We've outlined a framework. There's a difference. Yes, Woo Jin said, there is. The silence between them had edges. They left without resolution, which meant the conversation would continue elsewhere, which meant Shi-jun needed more information about what exactly this framework involved and who it served. He ran the variables while he lay still. He was very good at running variables. He had once run a complete restructuring analysis during a 30-minute boat ride while appearing to admire the Han River. His capacity for appearing to do one thing while actually doing another was, professionally speaking, one of his most refined skills. Zuri came in 10 minutes after they left. She looked at the monitors, she looked at his face. She said, "Your heart rate did a thing while those two were here. Nothing alarming, but noticeable." She made a note. "Either you're dreaming about something stressful, or your body has opinions about your visitors."
She tilted her head at his face.
"If I'm honest, both of those men make me want to stand a little closer to the door. I don't know them, I'm not making a judgment, it's just a feeling." She paused. "My feelings about people are usually pretty accurate." Shi-jun thought, "I am also beginning to believe that." On day 5, she told him about her day for the first time. This was how it started, the thing he had no name for yet, but that began to grow in that room the way things grow when they have no pressure on them and enough space and the right kind of light. She came in for her afternoon check and said, "Okay, I need to talk to someone and you're the only person on this floor who literally cannot interrupt me. So." She told him about a patient on the 3rd floor who kept calling her Vivian, which was not her name, and whom she had decided to stop correcting because correcting him made him anxious, and being called Vivian was a small price to pay for his peace of mind. She told him about the vending machine on the 2nd floor that had taken her money twice. Not different machines, the same machine. "It knows," she said. "I don't know how, but it knows." She told him that her good shoes, the ones with the small heel that she had bought for a date 8 months ago and then started wearing to work because the date had been terrible and she wanted to reclaim them as hers, were destroying her feet. "I can't return them," she said. "That would be giving him the win. Even though he will never know, I will know. And I will have let comfortable shoes become a symbol of defeat, and I can't do that." She looked at Shi-jun's face. "You would probably think this is irrational." He thought she was one of the most interesting people he had encountered in recent memory, which he recognized was a notable opinion to form about someone he had technically never spoken to. Day 7 brought Woo Jin alone. This was the first solo visit, and Shi-jun adjusted his surveillance strategy accordingly. Woo Jin sat in the chair beside the bed, which the other visitors never did. They always stood, as if sitting implied a kind of softness they did not want to display. Woo Jin sat and rested his forearms on his knees and looked at the floor for a moment before he looked at Shi-jun's face. He said, "I'm going to speak plainly, because you can't hear me, and I've been carrying this." He paused. "I don't know who ordered the hit. I have 3 theories and I'm working through them. What I do know is that Dae-sung was informed of your route that evening. I'm not saying he arranged it. I'm saying he had the information." Another pause. "I need you to wake up and deal with this yourself, because I don't have the authority to move on this alone, and I won't act without your direct instruction. I have too much respect for what you built to take that kind of unilateral action." He stood. He straightened his jacket. He said, "But I am not going to wait forever. So, please." He left. Shi-jun lay still and restructured his entire variable map from the inside out. Dae-sung had his route. Dae-sung had his route, and 2 men had been waiting. And now, Dae-sung was meeting with the Busan Alliance behind Woo Jin's back. The picture was not complete, but its shape was becoming clear, the way shapes become clear in fog when you stand still long enough. He needed more time. He needed more information. And he needed to be very careful, because if he was wrong about Dae-sung, he would be destroying the most important professional relationship of the last 15 years based on circumstantial evidence and a feeling that was uncomfortably close to grief. Zuri came in at 6 with her speaker and her playlist, and a small packet of honey-roasted almonds that she ate while reading his charts and said, "I found another book. This one has a dragon in it. I'm going in with low expectations and an open mind." She paused. "That's basically my entire life philosophy." He almost smiled. He was extremely careful not to. Day 9 was the reading day. She arrived with a paperback that she held up toward him briefly before she set it down, as if he could see it and might want to have a look, which he found illogically charming. She said, "Found it in the break room. Someone left it behind. Their loss, my lunch break's gain." She read to him for 20 minutes. It was a Korean romantic historical drama novelization that had been translated into English, and the translation was uneven in places, too literal in some sentences and too loose in others, but the story itself was compelling enough that the translation didn't matter. She read with good instinct, the kind of reader who understood where the weight of a sentence was and put it there without thinking about it. She stopped on a scene where the male lead was refusing to admit that he was standing outside the female lead's door in the rain because he missed her and had constructed an elaborate practical reason for being there. And she put her finger in the page and looked up and said to the room, or to Shijun, or to no one, "Why do they always do this? Why can't they just say the thing?" He shook her head. "Men. I don't care what century or what country. Same energy." She resumed reading. Shijun thought about every time in the last 15 years he had constructed an elaborate practical reason for doing something that had a much simpler emotional explanation, and thought that she was, in the specific way of people who state obvious truths, casually, completely correct. On day 11, the thing almost ended. He had developed a system. Small movements, only in the early hours before her first visit. Only adjustments that could be explained by the natural movement of unconscious sleep. He had calibrated these movements with care. He was a man who paid attention to detail, even when he was pretending to be unaware of details. What he had not calibrated for was Zuri arriving at 5:47 on day 11 instead of her usual 6:03. He heard the door and registered the time from his peripheral vision and had approximately 3 seconds before she was beside him. He had already begun a shift in his hand position. Just a slight one, just one that should have been invisible. The room was very quiet. She heard it. He knew she heard it because she went completely still. Not the stillness of someone startled, the stillness of someone processing. He stayed motionless. He kept his breathing exactly where it had been. He kept his face completely neutral with the full force of 15 years of professional composure. She walked to the monitors. She checked them slowly. She walked back and stood beside the bed, and he could feel her eyes on his face. This was, objectively, the most uncomfortable his plan had made him feel since it started. He was not uncomfortable because he was afraid of being caught. He was uncomfortable because she was someone he did not want to deceive, which was a sentence he applied to almost no one. She leaned forward and reached for the pillow. She adjusted it. And while she was doing it, close enough that he could hear her clearly and no one in the corridor could, she said, very quietly, "If you can hear me, you don't have to do anything. I'm not going to say a word to anyone. I don't know what's happening, and it is genuinely not my business." She straightened the pillow. "What is my business is that you were actually shot. Twice. And real wounds need real rest, not surveillance. So please, whatever you're doing, be careful with yourself." She straightened up. She walked to the door. She said, at her normal volume, easy and professional, "I'll be back at noon. I'm going to bring something for your hands. They're getting dry." She left. He lay in the silence that she left behind and felt something happen in his chest that the surgery had not caused, and the bullets had not caused, and that he was going to need considerably more time to understand. She had known, or she had suspected, long enough ago to have made a decision about what to do with that suspicion. And her decision had been to keep it and say nothing and ask him quietly to take care of himself. She had not leveraged it. She had not used it. She had wrapped it in a pillow adjustment and a note about dry hands and walked out. He had men who had pledged to die for him. He had never had someone simply ask him not to get hurt. He stared at the ceiling for a long time. Day 12. She came in, did her checks, did not reference the previous afternoon. He lay still and tried to figure out how someone could know something significant about another person and just carry it without making it about themselves, and decided this was a skill he had never encountered at close range and was not sure he could fully understand. She read more of the book. She stopped at a part where the female lead was finally confronting the male lead about why he kept appearing everywhere she was and pretending it was coincidence. And Zuri said, "She deserves this moment. She has earned this confrontation. Take your time, girl. Take all the time you need." She read his face after she said it. He felt her looking. He remained perfectly still. She turned the page. Day 13, Dae-sung came and brought someone Shijun did not recognize by footstep or by voice, which meant either someone new or someone who had been kept from him, both of which were problems. The unknown man said very little. He asked about the structure of the organization. Dae-sung answered in careful, general terms. The unknown man asked who would hold operational authority if the current leadership situation remained unresolved past 30 days. Dae-sung said, "That's a conversation for the appropriate forum." After they left, Shijun spent 40 minutes rebuilding his timeline from the beginning with this new variable incorporated. The hit, the route information, the Busan meetings, the unknown man asking about authority transfer. The picture was nearly complete. He needed 4 more days, maybe 5. Zuri came in that evening and looked at his monitors and looked at his face and said, "You had a stressful afternoon." She sat in the chair, which she rarely did. "I'm not going to ask. I just want you to know I noticed." She sat quietly for a moment. "I also want to say that whoever keeps coming in here with that cologne situation, he needs to understand that hospitals have scent policies for a reason. Some of us have to breathe in here." Shijun thought, "When I wake up officially, the first thing I'm going to do is tell Dae-sung to change his cologne, and I'm going to enjoy it more than is strictly professional." Day 14, she brought real food, not hospital food. She brought it in a container that she held up briefly before setting it on the tray table and said, "This is for when you wake up, whenever that is. My mother's jollof rice recipe, which I have adapted for a Seoul kitchen, which means I had to substitute about 4 things, but I tested it 3 times, and I think I got there." She paused. "I'm not going to pretend I made this for a patient I don't know. I made it because you've been here for 2 weeks, and no one who comes to see you has brought you food. That felt wrong." She paused. "Also because I can't eat all of it by myself, and it reheats well. So," she straightened, "when you wake up." He lay still and thought about the fact that this woman, who knew something she hadn't told anyone, who had watched his visitors with clear eyes and made quiet and accurate assessments of each of them, had gone home and made food, because she thought no one had thought to feed him. No one had thought to feed him. That was true. That was a fact he had not noticed until she said it. He thought about his apartment, which had a kitchen he used to make coffee and nothing else, because meals were functional events he handled between tasks. He thought about every dinner he had eaten alone at a restaurant table, choosing the corner seat, back to the wall, always facing the room. He thought about 15 years of treating nourishment as a logistical matter and not a human one. He thought Zuri Mensah was going to be a problem for him in a very specific and irreversible way. Day 15, he started talking to her, not out loud. He was not ready to surface officially, he needed 3 more days. But he had adjusted his strategy so that he was responding to her. Not with words, with the small things he could control. When she talked about the vending machine, he let his heart rate do something that the monitor registered faintly, just enough that she looked up at the machine. She said, "You agree with me, don't you? That machine is personal." When she read the part in the book where the male lead finally said the real thing and not the practical explanation, he let his breathing change, just for a second, just enough that she paused. She looked at his face. She said slowly, "Okay, see, now I don't know if you're dreaming, or if this book is better than I thought, or if something else is happening." She looked at him for a long moment. "Either way, it's a good moment." She read on. Day 16, Woojin came alone again.
He sat in the chair and did not look at the floor this time. He looked at Shijun's face directly, which was new, which meant something had shifted in his internal calculus. He said, "The unknown man is named Baek Jae-hyun. He is connected to the Busan Alliance in a financial capacity. He's been talking to Dae-sung for 6 weeks." He paused. "I found the records. It goes back to before the shooting." He said nothing for a moment. "I need you to tell me what to do. I can't move without you. But I can't wait much longer because Baek Jae-hyun is going to be back in Seoul in 5 days. And whatever they're planning, it's going to move when he gets here." He stood. He looked at Shijun's face one more time. He said quietly, "If you can hear this, now would be a good time." He left. Shijun made his decision that night. Day 17. He reached under the pillow where Woo-jin had placed the phone 3 days ago, at Shijun's direction, communicated through a coded arrangement of objects on his tray table, that Woo-jin had understood immediately because Woo-jin was, whatever else he was, exceptionally good at his job. He sent 4 messages. He made 2 calls. He spoke in low voices and in a window of 40 minutes between Zuri's evening visit and the night nurse's first round. By the time Zuri arrived at 6 on the morning of day 18, the Baek Jae-hyun situation had been resolved through 3 channels simultaneously.
The Busan Alliance's leadership, the people above Baek Jae-hyun, had received information that made his current activities a liability to them. The Singapore partners had been contacted by someone they trusted and given a direct assurance that required no further follow-up. And Dae-sung had received a message, from a source he could not trace, that made it clear someone with complete knowledge of his recent activities was watching. Shijun lay in the room and waited. Zuri came in and looked at the monitors and said, "Whatever you're dreaming today, it's very calm. Best readings you've had." She started her checks. "I take personal credit for that. I believe my presence is therapeutic." She said it so completely seriously that it took him a moment to catch the small edge of comedy in it. When he caught it, he filed it alongside everything else he had been collecting about her for 18 days. The way she moved, the way she thought, the way she carried information without being crushed by it. He thought, tomorrow. He lay still for one more day. He needed to see Dae-sung's response to the message. He needed to know if Dae-sung would reach out to Woo-jin, which would mean he was recalibrating and trying to shore up relationships, or if he would go quiet, which would mean he was deciding whether to run or double down. Dae-sung came in on day 18's afternoon, looking like a man who had found a spider in his shoe and was trying to behave as if he had not. He stood at the foot of the bed. He looked at Shijun's face. He stayed for 6 minutes, which was shorter than any previous visit. He said nothing. He left. Shijun ran the numbers and made his assessment. Dae-sung was recalibrating. He was not going to run. He was going to come back to the fold and be more careful, which meant he could still be used, which meant he was more valuable as a known quantity who was now afraid than as a removed threat who would be replaced by an unknown one. He would deal with Dae-sung properly when he was out of this bed, in a room, across a table, with the particular stillness that Shijun used when he wanted someone to understand the complete picture of their situation without having to say much at all. For now, he had one more day. He spent it listening to Zuri read the last chapters of the book. The male lead had, at this point, fully admitted to himself what the female lead was to him, and was in the process of doing everything in his power to be someone worthy of her, which the book handled with enough specificity that it was convincing and not sentimental. Zuri read it and said nothing for a long moment after the last chapter, and then said, "Okay, that was good. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't." She closed the book. "I'm taking this home, hospital property or not." She looked at Shijun's face. She said, very quietly, so quietly it was almost to herself, "You would have liked this story." He thought, "I did." Day 20, Morning, 6:03. She came in. He heard her set the speaker on the windowsill. He heard her pick up the tablet. He heard her start the playlist, a song he had come to recognize as the one she played when she was in a particular kind of good mood. Something older, something slow. He opened his eyes. He did it the same way he had been planning to for the last 48 hours. Slowly, deliberately, giving himself time to adjust to the light and to prepare exactly what he was going to say first. He had drafted this moment. He had a line that was direct without being dramatic, clear without being clinical, that would communicate both that he was alert and that he was grateful in a way that did not make either of them uncomfortable. He looked at the ceiling. He turned his head. He looked at Zuri Mensah, who was looking at her tablet with one hip resting against the counter, and who looked up, without any theatrics, met his eyes, and held absolutely still. He said, in English, because he had heard her for 20 days and knew exactly how to be understood by her, "You were right about the ending." She stared at him. She set the tablet down, very precisely, on the counter behind her. She said, "How long?" 20 days. The whole... She stopped. She breathed. Okay. She picked the tablet back up. She was recalibrating in real time. He watched her do it and thought it was one of the most efficient things he had ever watched a person do. She said, "On a scale of 1 to 10. 5. She looked at him over the tablet. 6.5. Better. She made a note. Any dizziness? Blurred vision? No. Nausea? No. Pain in the shoulder specifically? Some. Some means yes. Yes. Okay. She put the tablet down again and looked at him properly. The professional mode had not dropped. She was still his nurse. She was still doing her job. But behind it, there was something else now that she was looking at directly and not turning away from. She said, "I knew on day 11. I know. I actually suspected earlier, day 7. When your heart rate spiked precisely when those two men were arguing in low voices, and then returned to baseline the moment they resolved the argument." She tilted her head. "An unconscious person's heart rate doesn't do that." He said, "You're observant." "I'm a nurse." She said it simply, not modestly, just accurately. "Are you going to tell me what that was about?" He said, "No." "Good answer." He said, "Zuri." She said, "Don't thank me." "I need to." She looked at him steadily. "You don't owe me anything. I did my job and I didn't betray a patient. That's just who I am." A pause. "Although, it would have been really nice if you were actually unconscious sometimes and not running what I can only assume was a complete intelligence operation from that bed, because some of your readings were very stressful and I spent a lot of time worrying about your blood pressure for entirely fictional reasons." He said, "I was also healing. The operation and the recovery were not mutually exclusive." She looked at him. She said, "Was it worth it?" It was not a question. He said, "Yes." She said, "Okay then." She picked up the tablet. "Real food today. I'll arrange it." She started walking toward the door. "Your hands need attention. I'm also arranging that. Do not argue about the hands." He said, "The jollof rice." She stopped. She turned. He said, "The container you left on day 14. You said it reheats well." She looked at him for a moment. Something moved through her expression, not quite a smile, something quieter than a smile, something that happened in her eyes before it reached anywhere else. She said, "I'll bring it tomorrow." He said, "Thank you. For all of it." She looked at him for one more moment. Then she said, "Just get better, Shijun. and walked out. And he lay in the room that still had her music playing on the windowsill and thought about the fact that she had used his name without being asked, without being invited. And it had sounded so entirely natural in her voice that it felt less like something new and more like something that had already been true for a while. The next 3 days were the official surfacing. His doctor confirmed recovery, began the discharge planning, notified the relevant people that Park Shi-jun was conscious and oriented and would be ready to leave the hospital within 48 hours. Woo-jin came in and sat across from him, and they talked for 90 minutes in the direct, economical way they always talked, going through the events of the last 22 days with the efficiency of two people who had worked together long enough to not need full sentences. Woo-jin said, "Tae-sung." Shi-jun said, "I know." "What do you want to do?" "I want to have a conversation." Woo-jin looked at him. "That's it?" "For now." Woo-jin nodded. He understood that for now was not nothing. For now meant alive and under supervision, which was sometimes the most effective consequence. Woo-jin stood to leave and then paused at the door. He said, "Your nurse, the American one." Shi-jun said, "What about her?" "She runs a very tight floor. Nobody got in here who shouldn't. Nobody got information they shouldn't have." He paused. "She looked at my badge every single time. Every time. Even after she'd seen me 4 or 5 times. Every time she checked." He said it with something in his voice that Shi-jun recognized as professional respect. "You could use someone like that." Shi-jun said, "She's a nurse." "I'm just saying." "She's a nurse, she's going to stay a nurse." Woo-jin left without another word, but Shi-jun caught the edge of something on his face before the door closed that might, on a more expressive man, have been called a smile. On day 21, Tae-sung came in. This visit was different from all the others. He came alone, and he sat down in the chair, and when Shi-jun looked at him from the bed with the full weight of his attention, unmediated by closed eyes for the first time, Tae-sung held the look for exactly 3 seconds before he looked down. That was all Shi-jun needed to see. He said, "Tell me about Baek Jae-hyun." The color did not drain from Tae-sung's face, but something in it went very still. He said, "How much do you know?" "Everything." The silence after that was long. Tae-sung said, "I wasn't involved in the shooting." "I know you weren't." He said it calmly, because it was true. His investigation had confirmed it. Tae-sung had given the root information in a context where he could not have known it would be used this way. He had been played as much as Shi-jun had, by Baek Jae-hyun, who had used Tae-sung's ambition the same way all information is used, strategically. But you knew afterward that you'd given the information, and you made a choice about what to do with that knowledge.
Dae-sung said nothing. "You decided to see what happened, whether I survived or not, and to position yourself accordingly." Still nothing. "Which is practical," Shi-jun said, "and loyal to yourself, if not to me." He let that sit. "The question is what happens now." They talked for an hour. It was the most direct conversation they had ever had, which was perhaps the only good thing that had come out of 22 days. Dae-sung was not expelled. He was restructured. His role changed in ways that reduced his access to certain categories of information and increased his accountability to Woo-jin, which Dae-sung accepted with the particular dignity of a man who understood he was getting a better outcome than he had earned. He stood to leave. At the door he turned and said, "For what it's worth, I'm glad you woke up," Shi-jun said. "Change the cologne." Dae-sung blinked. "What?" "The Italian one. It announces you before you arrive. Change it." Dae-sung looked at him for a moment. Then he said, 15 years, and that's what you lead with. I've been meaning to say it for 12 of them." Something happened on Daesung's face that was complicated and tired, and possibly the most genuine expression he had shown in years. He left without another word. Zuri came in 20 minutes later with the jollof rice and a look that said she had passed Daesung in the corridor and had approximately 17 assessments she had chosen not to voice. He said, "Say it," she said. He seemed lighter. "He is." She set the container down and handed him a fork and said, "That's good. Lighter people make better choices." She sat in the chair and picked up the new book she had found. A different one. Something with an embossed cover that she had chosen based, she said, entirely on aesthetic grounds. It looked like it would have good architecture. I'm making no promises about the plot. He ate. She read. The room was quiet in the specific way that rooms are quiet when two people are comfortable enough to not need to fill the silence. He tried the food and said, "This is excellent." She did not look up from the book. "I know. The adaptation, with the substitutions. 3 attempts. I don't do anything 3 times unless I intend to get it right." He thought about that. He thought about what kind of person practices a recipe 3 times, for someone they are not required to feed, who cannot eat it while they make it, who cannot even confirm whether or not they would want it. He thought about what that kind of care looked like from the outside, and decided it looked like the most quietly radical thing he had seen in a very long time. He said, "Zuri." She looked up. He said, "I'm being discharged tomorrow." "I know." She looked back at the book. He said, "I would like to take you to dinner." She turned a page. "When?" "When I'm recovered enough to be in a restaurant without my team standing outside the door." She looked up again at that. She said, "Is that a significant qualifier?" "About 3 weeks." She considered this. She was not coy about it, not performatively uncertain. She was actually thinking, which was, he had come to understand, how she handled everything. She thought about it and then came to a conclusion and stayed there. She said, 3 weeks. Where? "I know a place." "Of course you do." She looked at him. "Is it good?" "It's the best meal you'll have in Seoul." "That's a very large claim." "I'm aware." She tilted her head. She said, "You're Korean. You understand everything I've been saying, this whole time." "Yes." "Including the part about the man with the cologne." "Especially that." She stared at him. Then she put her face in her book for a moment, and he heard something from behind it that was almost certainly a laugh she was containing by force. She reappeared. She said, very composed, "Okay, 3 weeks. Dinner, the best meal in Seoul." She pointed the book at him. "And you're going to speak Korean to me while we're there, because I need the practice and you clearly have opinions about my pronunciation that you have been too polite to share." He said, "Your tones need work." She said, "Finally, some honesty." From a man who was fake unconscious for 20 days. He said, "The honesty was always there. The consciousness was what was fake." She looked at him. Then she said, "That's actually a fair distinction." She went back to her book. He finished the jollof rice. The music was still playing from the windowsill, low and unhurried. And outside the window, Seoul was moving in its particular way, fast and layered and indifferent to the small things happening in individual rooms. This room was not indifferent. This room had, over 22 days, become the site of something neither of them had planned, which was perhaps the only way the real things ever happen. Not planned. Not arranged. Just 2 people in a space, over time, with enough honesty between them to let something true grow. On the morning of day 22, Zuri arrived at 6:03 exactly. He was already sitting up in the bed, dressed in the clothes Woojin had brought, jacket folded over the chair. He was ready in every practical sense. She stopped in the doorway. She looked at him sitting there, and something crossed her face that she let him see. Which was the most significant thing because she was not a person who showed things she did not choose to show. She came in. She did his final checks. She made her final chart entry. She was precise and professional and thorough in the same way she had been on day 2, day 9, day 15, and every day in between. She said, "Everything looks good. You're cleared." She set the tablet down and picked up the pale blue speaker from the windowsill and put it in her bag. She looked at him. 3 weeks, he said. "I'll find you," she said. "I know where you'll be. She tilted her head. "You're in my chart," he said. "Zuri." She said. "Shijun." He said, "Thank you." She looked at him steadily and said, "You already said that." "I know. I needed to say it again when you could look at me." She held the look. She said, "Don't get shot again." "I'll do my best." "Do better than your best. Your best still got you in here for 3 weeks with a fake coma situation." She picked up her bag. Real rest, real food, real recovery, not surveillance. Agreed. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame and turned back one more time. And he looked at her standing there with her bag and her speaker and her clear eyes. And she looked at him sitting in the chair by the bed in a room that had held both of them for 22 days without either of them choosing it. She said, "The book I read you, the ending." "Yes." He stood in the rain for her. "I know. Just making sure you remember." She paused. 3 weeks, Park Shijun. She left. He sat in the room for another minute. He looked at the window. He looked at the chair where she had sat and read and laughed quietly and carried things she didn't have to carry. He looked at the tray table where the food container had been. He looked at the windowsill where the pale blue speaker had been. He thought about standing in the rain. He thought, 3 weeks. Then he stood, picked up his jacket, and walked out of the room toward a city that did not know yet what kind of man was coming back to it. Not a harder one, not a softer one. A man who had, in 22 days of stillness, learned something he could not unknow, that the most dangerous thing that had ever happened to him had not been 2 bullets. It had been a woman who talked to herself at 6 in the morning and had not asked him for a single thing and had given him, in return for nothing, the most uncomplicated kindness of his adult life. He walked out of the hospital into Seoul's morning, and the city received him the way it always had, with noise and light and the particular indifference of large places. And he walked into it already counting the days. And that is the full story of Park Shijun and Zuri Mensah, the Mafia boss who played dead and the nurse who let him, and what grew between them in the stillness. If this story sat with you, if you felt the pillow scene or the jollof of rice or that final doorway moment, I need you to hit like right now. Subscribe to this channel because there are more Afro-Korean stories coming, and every single one is built to make you feel exactly this. Drop a comment and tell me, which moment made you completely give up the fight against falling for these two? Was it day 11? The food? When she said his name for the first time? I want to know. Watch another story right now. The next one is waiting for you, and I will see you there.